Hello, world. This is Hello Chaos, the podcast about the ups and downs, ins and outs, and highlights and low points of entrepreneurship. I am your co-host, Jennifer Oladipo, a.k.a. Jenno.
And I'm Jennifer Sutton, a.k.a. I guess J.J. is my nickname. And we're here welcoming Danielle Kaminsky. She is with Reinvention. Did I say that right? Warehouse, the Reinvention Warehouse?
Reinvintage.
Reinvintage Warehouse, because it's a really cool maker's studio, and excited to welcome her virtually. And thank you, Danielle. Thank you for being our guest.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So Danielle, tell us about, so you're a fellow South Carolinian.
Yes, I am.
We have folks from all over, so it's nice to have somebody local, really local, actually. I don't think we've had Greenville people in a minute. But you're in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So just tell us a little bit about your business and how you got started, because you before Reinvintage Warehouse, you have your own maker business.
Yes. So like you said, I'm from Spartanburg. I grew up in Spartanburg County. I've lived here my whole life, went to school here and everything. But I started, finished college, was doing regular office jobs. And back in 2014, in 2010, I had a hobby, right? I was like making jewelry at home and selling it to friends and family and coworkers. And then in 2014, I was working in a tax office, and it was down the street from a new store that opened, and it was Vintage Warehouse of Spartanburg, and they were taking vendors, and I joined as a vendor on their vendor team back in 2014, and I was still working a full-time job, but I sort of slowly worked my way into helping out with different things behind the scenes, and as the founding partners decided that they were ready to move on to the next thing or retire, I bought out their shares in the company. And so this past year, we went through a rebranding, which was the Reinvintage Warehouse that we were talking about, the idea of building on what already existed. But as the years went by, it started out a little more like the traditional antique mall model as far as how the store does business. But there's a lot more handmade vendors. It's definitely a very different aesthetic. So we wanted to make sure that we were sending the right message, that it's not only vintage items, we're reinventing vintage basically. So and we're taking, handmade things into the picture. So
like a live Etsy.
Kind of, yeah, really. Yeah. It's a combination, I guess, of Etsy and eBay, really, because we have some really cool vendors that have some awesome vintage items. We have one of our vendors in particular restores like old radios and then adds Bluetooth to them, so they're functional in their original capacity, but he's sort of bringing them into the current era so that people can use them the way they would typically use speakers in their home. So it's a really cool setup and a really awesome group of vendors. As far as my business, it's made by Danielle, because I was one of those people in the beginning. I went through every little thing that I made. I gave it like a cute little name because it was fun. But I had the Crafty Wino where I made candles, and then I had Wired Essentials where I made jewelry. And then I started painting furniture, and I was like, we've got to get a handle on this. So it just became Made by Danielle to sort of cover all of the creative things that I decided to take on in my business.
So when did you feel like, managing a retail space is very different from, what you've described. So what made you feel like you could or should take the leap and now own and operate a retail operation?
Well, it was kind of, I guess, to some extent a retail operation from day one, as far as having the open store hours for people to come in and shop. But in 2016, I was still technically a vendor. I had stepped into a little bit of a management role with fellow vendors, and we moved into this larger location. And basically the store, it grew faster than us. You know what I mean? Like it took on a life of its own. We went from having 20 odd vendors in the old location to now we were in a 33,000 square foot building, and we had, 50 or 60 vendors, I guess, at the time. It still fluctuates between 50 and 70, depending upon the vendors themselves, because some of them take up larger spaces and some smaller spaces. So there's a lot of fluctuation in the actual number. But yeah, as things kind of progressed, it was like, I've noticed that more and more of the traditional antique malls, I guess you would say, were starting to shutter their doors. The general way that they did business was all word of mouth. It was all local. There was nothing online. They weren't leaning into digital marketing in a way that was sustaining them as the trends and patterns, of our economy were changing. So we really, I would say over the past couple of years, tried to step into a little bit more of a traditional retail role, adding in the e-commerce, finding ways to tap into the changes that were happening around us, because it was really great that these small businesses, these makers who otherwise their only option for selling their products would have been, say, Etsy or a craft fair, being able to run successful businesses that could help support their families. But in order to make that work in a model like ours and make it continue to be profitable, not only for the business, but for all of the vendors in there as well, we did have to kind of, like you said, sort of step it up and start doing some of the more traditional retail things, I guess you would say. Like I said, adding in the e-commerce and all of that.
So you offer that as for your vendors, that you are maintaining kind of that, I would say, one-stop shop in an e-commerce fashion, almost what they're calling it re-commerce, I think, if you're repurposing and taking all goods, like handmade goods, under kind of, they're calling it, that's the re-commerce trend. I don't know if that, but you're managing that for all of your vendors.
Yes. So we are very fortunate. We found a system that it integrates our in-store point of sale with an e-commerce website. So they can bring their items into the store and they're available for sale in our brick and mortar, as well as being for sale online through our website. And when we get online orders, we can package them up and ship them out for our vendors as part of our service.
Fantastic.
So that's a lot of people and a lot of steps and a lot of processes. So where do things tend to break down?
Communication in general. You can talk to, we joke all the time. I feel like people have got to be getting annoyed of hearing me say the things that I say, but it never fails. As soon as I stop giving the instructions and saying things as often as I have, then someone walks in and they're like, "Oh, we were having an event today." And it was just like, and it just never ceases to amaze me. Like there's no such thing as over communicating when it comes to working with a group of people that big. And no matter how much you do, everyone just has such different patterns in their daily lives. I mean, I send text messages through the community app. I use, obviously, email. I will mail out things to our vendors sometimes, and it never fails. There are always, with that group of people, there are people that they don't know what's going on. They've missed it somehow.
How big is your team managing all of this? And did you grow that team? Did you inherit the team, or did you have to create your own team?
So actually, you talk about real life moments. I inherited a team that was bigger than I needed, and I had to go through the awful experiences of downsizing that team. Just because there's, like I said, in a model like this, there's not the room for margin that some larger companies have. And we really had too many people. Not that there wasn't enough work to be done, but we had to restructure this year. Okay. So now the team itself, as far as the vendors, like I said, that fluctuates from 50 to 70. People who are technically working for the company fluctuate significantly. It's been as many as 5 people on a regular steady basis, and as few as 2. And it really just depends on who's bringing what to the table at the time. A lot of the people who end up working for the store, as far as staff, they're also vendors in the store. Okay. And we kind of like it that way because they're really invested in the store doing well, because they are also, business owners inside of that space. And of course, the seasons, the seasons make a huge difference when it comes to retail. Summer is hard. Summer is really hard, and especially hard for us because it is a very cool space. It's like a reimagined textile warehouse, but that means we don't have air conditioning.
Oh,
So
in South
in the
Carolina.
upstate in South Carolina in the summer, that's a struggle. So we have to really work with, fans and dehumidifiers and all the things to keep it remotely comfortable during the high heat season, and giving customers a reason to continue to come, and not pretending that it's not hot, because it is, but how do you counterbalance that? I mean, people aren't stupid. I could tell them all day long, oh, it feels good in here today. You're not dumb. I mean,
Yeah. So that
so
staff fluctuation, I mean, I guess that's pretty normal in retail. The big folks are doing that too, scaling up and scaling down with the seasons. But when you had to, when you had to restructure the staff, it's a lot of folks like yourself, right? A lot of people who are makers, you were saying. So, I mean, how did you handle those conversations?
I was just super honest. I mean, I was honest from day one. That has been a criticism that I have received in the past, is that I tell too much. I give too much information out. I should play things closer to the vest, but I'm not good at that. I'm very transparent. I let the vendors know when we're struggling to keep up with different expenses and things like that. I let them know what they can do on their end to help. And then the same went with our staff. It was like, okay, we really can't afford to have all of us here. If we're all going to be here, we have to be doing things that are going to produce an income, so that I can continue to pay you. And we all worked really hard and did all of those things, but we just had too many people. We had too many people, and too many people doing the same thing, and that was what it boiled down to. It wasn't so much that there wasn't work to be done, but we really needed to kind of just step back and restructure a little bit. So I was just as honest as I could possibly be. And because they were vendors in the store, I tried to do things on the back end to make it easier. If they were, ended up going to look for other jobs, some of them just stepped up their participation in their own business. And, it was a very open and honest conversation, probably not like a standard employee and boss transaction. I mean, I consider them all to be really good friends, and they're still all vendors in the store that I get to see on a regular basis. So,
Oh, that's great. So the relationships are still intact.
yeah,
What did
yeah.
is there anything in particular that you felt like, because this is, something that a lot of people are going to have to deal with at some point.
All right.
Or they've already dealt with.
Yeah. And so, was there anything that you did that you were really mindful about to help keep the relationships intact?
Again, I think just being as honest as I could, and acknowledging that, I knew it sucked. I mean, I wasn't going to pretend that, oh, it's going to be okay. And even still, when things come back and I've got a few hours here or there, or not even necessarily hours, but hey, I need a little help with this thing. If you can come help with this, maybe we could knock this much off your rent, or we could do this, or we could do that. Just continuing to reach out, and also acknowledging, but if you don't want to do that, that's cool. You can tell me. I get it. If you don't want to, that's okay. I don't know. I guess, like I said, just being honest, I was hopeful that we had built up a close enough relationship going into that it would work out. But I mean, some of it was just a testament to the quality of employee that I had. They were all very understanding people, very empathetic. They all had business minds of their own because they were running small businesses. They understood. They had seen the patterns. They were in the store. They knew that, the trends were going down a little bit this summer, especially this year. There was a lot going on that was entirely outside of our control, outside of our country even, that was affecting how things were playing out. And they saw that. And so they were understanding.
I think
I don't know. I don't know that there's anything that I did. I think I was fortunate to just have really good people working for me, people that I had built relationships with. I've always tried to be really respectful of the people that worked with me. I will say this. I am not good. And I used to tell the people that worked for me this, I'm not necessarily good at being the boss sometimes. I'm very much a team person. In my mind, we're all in this together. Yes, I've got to do all this stuff, but I want you to be invested and be there with me. We were all working towards the same goal. At the end of the day, yeah, I was the one that had to make the decisions, but I tried to sort of make them a part of it. If they
Right.
had suggestions, going into that, I was open to hearing them. They didn't necessarily work out, but I was open to. I mean, I
Yeah.
just
That's right.
tried to be open.
It's that
That's
it's
all.
that old
That's
saying,
all I know to say to that.
people support the world they help to create, right?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that style worked, and also it's amazing when you tell people the why and they understand the why behind decisions, that they are way more on board with those decisions than not having that transparency. So kindness and respect and transparency does go a long way. It's not a I could tell you were kind of like,
yeah.
I don't know, I've been told that as is that because we get that as females as we kind of come up through the workplace of you're too direct, you're too transparent, in more corporate environment. And I think it's a strength in founders.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's a big discussion right now. For anyone who's listening, it is August, August 2022, and that's kind of in the zeitgeist right now in the business world. How much do you share? How transparent are you? What's it cost? What's it worth? That kind of thing. So it's I think it's good to hear stories where it's like. Sometimes it doesn't cost as much as you think it will, and
Right.
it's actually exactly what people need.
That's right. Danielle, I'm curious of when you guys made the decision to to rebrand the warehouse to go from more of a antique mall type to more of this reinvention, revintage. Was that an easy thing for your vendors to jump on board, or did that help amplify and bring more vendors in?
So honestly, it hasn't changed much. So here's the thing. We were Vintage Warehouse of Spartanburg, but this idea of reinventing the old to make it something new has actually been the concept from day one. So
Okay.
we were rebranding in name and messaging, but the store already fit that. So we
Okay.
were really just changing the brand and the messaging to match what already existed so that the people who didn't know who we were had a better understanding of what it was that we do. So it ended up not really being any kind of a change for our vendors. Nothing much changed on the back end except for, some social media handles, the logo, the URL, those kinds of things. But as far as the day to day, nothing really changed that much.
What about with the audience or the clientele? Was that very helpful there?
I think it was the customers who already know us, of course, were coming in and they could see that nothing had changed. We had just changed our name. So I have a lot of conversations at checkout now. People are like, so you changed your name. Why did you change your name? And I get to explain why we changed our name. And they're always like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I haven't had anybody be negative about it yet. And then for what I noticed, someone asked me the other day, how do I measure whether or not that has been successful? And to me, you get dozens of phone calls a day. And the questions that you get on the phone, in my opinion, are what let you know whether or not it's working.
Yeah.
So traditionally, we would get 10 calls a day, maybe not 10 calls a day, that's an exaggeration, but a ton of calls. Do you buy antiques? Can I bring this up there to sell to you? Like they just had a completely different vision of what Vintage Warehouse of Spartanburg was. And we still get some of those calls, of course, because it takes a long time to break patterns. But we are getting a lot more calls these days of, do you sell furniture paint? Do you teach classes? Do you, offer custom paint services? I mean,
And those are
things
things
that
that
we
you do.
the things that we do, the things that we are looking to get the message out there. So I do feel like, any rebranding process takes time, but I do feel like it is being successful in making sure we're reaching the right people and letting people know what it is that we really do.
How are you seeing the balance between that bricks and mortar with online? Are you seeing it 50-50, or is it, still brick and mortar is king? I mean,
it's still mostly brick and mortar for us. Of course, when everything's one of a kind, people really do want to come in
that's
and
right.
see it and touch it
it.
and experience it. We really try to, the aesthetic in the store, I aim to be one where people want to come hang out all the time, even if they're not spending money. Because then when they're ready to spend money, they think about us first. So that's kind of my thought process there. And because we're constantly changing things and making a space where people want to hang out and just enjoy being around the inspiration and around the beautiful things, we still have more business coming in as far as our physical brick and mortar. But we're adding more and more products online every day. The other thing, like I said, we have anywhere from 50 to 70 vendors at a time, and they have to make the decision to put their stuff on the website.
Yeah.
And some of them are still getting used to that. So, but it is definitely growing. It's a little bit of a bigger presence as far as on the sales sheet every month, as far as how much business is happening online.
And you're doing even more than that, right? So you've got the retail, and the way I found you was the conference, actually. So you're doing more than just creating the space. You're actually helping people grow their businesses as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm pretty passionate about helping these small businesses with these really cool products find a way to make it work for them. Everybody can't take their hobby and make it a full-time job. I get that. But to the extent that we can help somebody learn what they need to learn to make that decision if they want to, or to make it a bigger part of their income, I want to be able to help. And I feel like, and I don't just feel like, I've had many conversations with lots of other makers and business owners. And what I consider to be more of the, like we were talking about earlier, the sort of the old school mindset is that idea of you can't share your secrets. You can't tell people what you do. You can't tell them what's working, right? And that's what was told to me several times. If you tell people how to do what you do, they won't need you anymore. And I don't buy that. I just don't buy it. I think that there's room for everyone at the table, especially now that we've got e-commerce as a possibility. And even in a town like Spartanburg, I think the more businesses we have that are doing the types of things we're doing, that now just makes us a go-to spot for people who want that kind of thing, who want that community, who want that artistic possibility. So I started, I guess it's been a year and a half ago now. I started a podcast called the Maker's Chat Podcast. And I would have people come on and we would talk about their creative process. We would talk about the products they sold, how they did what they did, their whole story. And then right alongside of that, I had started, I guess technically it started before the podcast, like I said, the communication thing. And I felt like I was saying the same things over and over again. At some point, it was like, okay, if you're saying the same things over and over again, you should record them so that they live somewhere, that when someone asks you a question, you can send them to that thing and they can listen to you say it instead of you having to repeat the same hour-long conversation 20 times. So that was sort of when the idea of creating some trainings and courses and things like that came in for people that were trying to do the types of things I was doing. So I learned very slowly. Like I said, it was very much a hobby and then a little side hustle before it became a full-time thing for me. And so I became really familiar with Google and YouTube and how to find people online and get the answers that I needed and learn the different skills that I needed. So I just sort of condensed that and put it into a course. So I started selling the course, started a membership group that went along with that, started coaching other women that weren't necessarily, or men, but it is mostly women, that were attracted to learning that kind of thing. And then it's just kind of snowballed. Then we added the podcast and now the conference. And the idea is just that there's too many people who think that it's unattainable to have a business. And I want to make it attainable, especially when it's a creative business like this. There's so many different ways that can look. So to be able to have the conversation with people and be like, look, these are the basics that you need to know. And then, this is how you dive into figuring out what it is that you want to do. Now let's put all that together and figure out how to build a business that is what you want it to be.
That's right. Passionate
maybe it's
paycheck.
Just part-time. Maybe it's a full-time thing. You just never know. But that was sort of the goal there, was to kind of add that element too. And then I get to do all that and I'm offering it to people outside of my community. Well, bringing them into my community, making them a part of it, right? But, reaching outside of Spartanburg. But then I also now have these things available so that when I start interacting with new vendors in my store, I can give them these resources. And because of the model of my business, for me to be successful, they need to be successful and vice versa. Like our success really does depend on each other. The rising tide lifts all boats. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rising Tide Society, but I'm a card carrying member at this point. Like I love that group and everything that it stands for. So.
Yeah. And your speakers, your other presenters, they're from like all over the country, right?
Absolutely. So we had Dion Wood, who is the turquoise iris. She is a furniture painter, a very, very well-known furniture painter. Anyone who's put paint on furniture has probably heard of her if they're in the U.S. especially. She's based out of Oklahoma. And then a lot of other people. Ashton Zager was the other keynote speaker. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina. We had Yami Platero, the Latina next door. She's grown a very successful YouTube channel. Other makers at varying levels of experience and how far they've gotten, but all very good at what they do and really having something to bring to the table to teach people. And then also able to learn from the other speakers that are there. Like, in the same way that when I'm running the store, I like for the people running the store to be people who are invested in the store doing well.
Yeah,
That's right.
Putting on a conference where the speakers that are coming are also investing in hearing what the other speakers have to offer. I think that just makes for a better experience for everyone. You don't have people who are just dialing it in and checking out. You have people who want to be actively involved in the conversation.
That's great.
Fantastic. What is the conference called, Danielle?
Makers and Shakers.
Makers and Shakers. And
Makers
it's based
and
in
Shakers.
South Carolina?
My friend Kristen Calhoun actually came up with that name.
And it's in Spartanburg? Is it based out of, or is it, okay.
Spartanburg.
So what do you think? I mean, there's so many people out there who are, I make something, I'm really good at it. People like it. What have you seen are the barriers from, like you said, passion to paycheck? Like what stops people from getting to the point where they
can't monetize it into a business?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome is a very real thing. And I also know it's kind of been almost like a buzzword for the past couple of years. You hear people use it a lot, but just general insecurity is what it boils down to. People who they see other people doing something similar and they've got all this success and they're watching it through the lens of social media and they think that everybody else is doing it so much better than they are. And why should they have a seat at the table? And trying to change that question to why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you be able to show up with what you have and offer that? But I really do think that that's it. I think most people, it's just the insecurity of getting started. I think sometimes it's also the overwhelm of what does it take to make this a business? They feel like there's too much that they don't know. So again, trying to bridge that gap between what they know and what they don't know so that it doesn't feel quite so intimidating to get started. Because it's not super difficult to get started. Yes, as you grow, it can become a lot more layers. You might need a lot more people involved, but just to get started on a very basic level, it's very attainable. So I think it's a knowledge gap. And then I think it's just a little bit of a mindset thing of teaching people that, you don't have to be just like this person over here. There's still room for you to do this. There's still a space for you to do what you love.
Did you go through that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I go through it every year.
How
I
do you
go
break
through it every month. I believe
how
that
do you
we
break
all
that?
are going to struggle with that continually. It's about learning how to talk to ourselves to get out of it when it comes at us.
What do you say to yourself when you experience that, or what do you tell other people? This is how you coach yourself out of that mindset.
Well, there's all the little caveats in there, right?
Yeah.
And one of the big things is like, well, so-and-so's already doing that. And I'm like, so? Does every person, let's say it's candles, can that person make enough candles for every person in this state that wants to buy a candle? No. And then you add online to the factor, right? And it's like, okay, there's people from all over the country buying candles. Can I literally make enough candles to get in everyone's home? I try to print out things when I'm doing speaking engagements to have actual numbers of the locations that I'm in, because it's like you start looking at how many people live in a town. If everybody in that one town just wanted one candle, one person couldn't produce enough candles,
Right.
to get into everyone's home in a certain given amount of time. So there's also just the fact that the market is so much bigger than people realize, no matter what it is that you create. And sometimes just reminding people of that. And I have to do the same thing. I'm like, okay, there's how many people in Spartanburg? It's like there's how many people doing this. Even with the podcast, I've had that with the podcast before. I'm like, oh, every time I see another podcast doing something similar, I'm like, oh man, should I keep doing this? There's somebody else doing it now. And then it's like, Danielle, what are you talking about? Of course you should, because the thing is, people who enjoy listening to podcasts don't listen to one podcast.
True.
Right.
I don't listen to one podcast. I listen to dozens of podcasts.
True.
And I don't stop listening to one because I start listening to a new one.
That's right.
So I think we have, and again, I think it's a little bit of that old school way of thinking that it's like we think there can only be one thing. There can be one brand. There can be one show, one whatever. But dadgummit, look at CSI. They were running that show for how many years? And how many varieties did they have?
How many Law and Orders are there out there?
Yeah. But people who love it, I spoke at a conference in July, and I was talking with this girl, and she was talking about that. And I asked her, I was like, what's your favorite movie? And she told me, and I don't remember what it was, but it was, let's say it was Dirty Dancing. I was like, okay, so that's your favorite movie. So you don't want them to ever come out with another movie about dancing and romance, right? She's like, well, of course not. Of course she wants to watch that movie too. And it was just like, I mean, that's the idea. It's like, nobody wants just one thing. Everybody wants a variety. Everyone wants options. And there's so many people out there to serve. So really, that's what I feel like that's usually what it is. That's the conversation I have to have with myself to get over that sometimes. I don't have to be as good as the best person out there. I just have to be me, have what I have to offer, and the people who are interested will show up. But I have to show up if I expect them to show up, because otherwise they don't know that I exist.
That's right. That's right. That's fantastic, Danielle. I'm curious. I mean, I know you're kind of centered in Spartanburg, but your vision and things that you've already created and you built the structure, you could take that out of Spartanburg and go, franchise or, take it to a multi-city, because I think your message resonates not just
yeah, definitely.
well, and also just the way that the warehouse and the way you've created that vendor structure. There's a lot of what I call cities that want that model, but they don't know how to set it up.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Is that a vision, or is that a dream of yours to go,
One of the things, it's funny, someone else asked me that a while back, and basically what I said was, I'm not interested in stretching myself between here and somewhere else, but I'm always happy to work with someone who wants to head up another community and share what I've learned. Because, and that's, and a little bit of, I've actually been able to do that to some extent inside my membership group where I'm coaching other women who are doing similar things. There's actually been 3 women this year who have opened up businesses in other parts of the country with a very similar model that I get to mentor and help them figure it out and give them, the resources that I've been using, help them set up their model for their town, because Spartanburg's demographic is going to look different from a small town in Texas or somewhere, in wine country in California. So, just having those conversations to be like, this is what works here, and then figuring out what's going to work there and helping them work through that. So I very much like that part of what I do. I don't know that I necessarily want to franchise. I like having the community aspect, but I also do love helping other people build their own communities and figuring out what it looks like for them to have a local setup. So
what are some of those nuances from one community to another? Like, what's something that works in Spartanburg that may not work somewhere else, or, as you found with other people being interested in
I guess I'd say doesn't work. It's not necessarily that it doesn't work, but for example, we do workshops and things. So the projects that might happen inside of our workshops in South Carolina might have a bit of a Southern feel to them, right? Southern hospitality. We might be using pineapples for door hangers or things of that nature. Probably wouldn't go off super well in Northern Ohio. That's not necessarily their vibe. So like really talking to people about what makes your area unique. What do the people who live near you love? There's always going to be overarching things, right? Like people loving to read. A book club could do well anywhere, right? But exactly what you do at that book club, whether you are having a ladies' night, wine night kind of thing, or whether you're living in an area where it's more academics and you're going to be picking a different genre of book for that crowd, and maybe the products that you offer to them are different, because if you have a widely professional academic type environment coming into your store, the things they're going to be interested in are going to be different than if you're living in a rural area where maybe more of your audience are soccer moms who are running kids back and forth to school. It's just a little bit of a different, it can have a different bent. And not that those things don't overlap either, but just really thinking about what's happening in your neighborhood, in the area where you are. What are people interested in? So there's a lot of things that I can offer and be like, but you're not going to want to do this class that I did. This worked well here because we have a local team that's the Tigers. And so we did this cool tiger project and everybody loved it, right? Mm-hmm. That may not take off as well in Montana. They may need to do something completely different, you know, as far as what the project is.
Cow skulls.
I was thinking mountain lions.
There you go. Yeah.
So how do you coach business owners into figuring out, you know, basically you're talking about product market fit. So how do you coach them into figuring out what is the fit for their market?
Just honestly, just a lot of conversation. And like I was talking earlier about my question to her about her favorite movie, like helping people understand that you might not be your ideal customer, but they are a person just like you. So if you can figure out how to answer these questions for yourself and then look around you at your neighbors and what they're doing and the people who are coming into your store and what they do and ask those same questions about them, find the common ground. That's the other thing. I get tickled sometimes when people are like, oh, I'm going to do this thing because so-and-so's doing it and they're making a lot of money, but they're trying to connect with people who are wine drinkers and they don't drink because of their religious belief, right? I mean, like you've got to find the common ground between you and your customer to make it work. I mean, you don't have to be just like them, but you need to figure out how you can communicate with them.
Right.
And lean into that, because that's what makes small business different. It's the people running it. And that's the reason there's room for so many, because we're not all trying to be the next Sears or JCPenney's or Hobby Lobby or whatever. And really, I see fewer and fewer of those when I go out. Like, I feel like we're getting back to the small business more and more. I know not everything. There's still Amazon. We still got to deal with that, right?
But the idea.
But you know what I mean.
Embrace shop local and more handicraft. I do think that is a trend that is, you know, more of the bespoke. Craft makers.
Yeah, so, I think it's gotten past trend at this point, because I feel like, you know, 15 years ago, like people had to say shop local. And now when people are thinking about buying things, I hear a lot more people saying, you know, well, you know, I want to find something local for, you know, they'll look like it's on the radar in terms of options, where for a long while it wasn't. You know, that was, I feel like at least a couple generations really, where things just got very corporate, and now that's on the table. Yeah, now that's on the table with all the other options. You don't have to like drag people
that's right.
to somewhere.
Danielle, what was your biggest through this whole journey? What was your biggest, you know, oh shit, oh no, what's that moment? Can you describe it? And you're laughing, so I know you have one.
No, it's fine. I will say, when you're dealing with so many different people, there's always stuff that's going to happen. And I've always been a fairly empathetic person. I'm constantly worried about what people are going to think. I'm constantly trying to envision how people are going to respond to things. And, you know, sometimes people let you down. And figuring out how to navigate that with people watching is really hard. So, and then talking about it after the fact is one of those things that I just don't want to do. People mess up, but then they're still people, and you loved them at least for some point of your life, and they weren't all bad.
Or maybe not.
Nobody's all bad, right? So yeah, that's always interesting. But I can tell you this, because it was funny and it had nothing to do with people. The building that we're in, like I said, it's an old building. It's a very old building. And one of the sections of the building was added during a time when they weren't as strict, I guess, or maybe they were, but somebody just got away with it. This entire addition was kind of just put together, and they didn't pull permits for it. They didn't check on all these things. And they built the addition directly over the top of a sewer system.
Nice.
Oh.
So we've always had issues with maintaining the plumbing and getting things, working well. But there was this one night after I had, because so there were two founding partners, right? So I bought one out when she retired in 2018. And then for 2 years, I worked, side by side with the other before she was ready to move on. And I bought her out at the end of 2020. So 2021, springtime, I'm 3 months into this thing being just me, and the buck stops here. And we have events throughout the year to bring people in. That's how we bring new people into the store. And we were doing a 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. People set up on Thursday afternoon, Friday morning. They were there for the weekend. So it was our vendors plus new vendors, and we would have all kinds of fun things happening to bring people into the store. So Friday night, we're getting ready to leave. Everyone's packing up to go home for the day. We're getting ready to leave. And one of the girls comes over to me, and she's like, "Danielle, something's wrong." And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "I don't know." She said, "But there's like a leak in this room, and it smells really bad. I'm really worried." And I'm like, "Okay." So again, this is Friday night. This is 4:45 on a Friday night, and we have an event the next day. So I go to try to figure out what's happening. I call people who maybe know more than me about this building, because it's an old building. And at one point, they had thought that they were going to add some restrooms, and they paid this guy to start doing the plumbing for restrooms. They got caught, and not caught. The guy didn't pull permits. So the city came out and they said, "Nope, you can't do this anymore. You've got to cap everything off and stop until you pull permits." Well, they decided it wasn't worth it. So they capped everything off.
But not really.
They didn't. They didn't really.
So it was just a gaping hole
The
to the
system had backed up, and we had septic overflow in our shipping room, which was right beside where we had all of our visiting vendors set up for the weekend.
Oh no!
At 5:00 on a Friday night. You talk about an oh shit moment. It was literally an oh shit moment. So we had to call somebody out that night. And I'm telling you, my husband and the girls that were working for me, they were phenomenal at trying to keep me calm. Because I'm panicking. How much is this going to cost me? This is insane.
Right.
I've got people coming out after hours. We're moving people's stuff so that it doesn't get affected, fixing this whole problem.
You're like, where are the candles? Every candle vendor.
Right, though, because then I realized they've opened everything up to the septic system. And my husband's like, "Oh, no, you can't light a candle around all that." And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? So anyway, it was a very late night. We got the problem fixed. We got it cleaned up. My family came out even late at night to help me clean and mop, and we threw a lot of stuff away.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was
including the clothes that you wore that night.
It was awful, but we got it done. We got it cleaned. We threw, like I said, we threw stuff away. It was a group effort. There was at least a half a dozen of us there past midnight that Friday night trying to get everything cleaned and sorted. And
it's teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Yeah.
Is that what they?
Work.
It was
okay.
It was when I just. A little side note, Danielle, you'll appreciate this. When we first opened up our building to the marketing agency that we own, I'm out there, I'm cleaning toilets, and somebody drove by that we knew and honked their horn. They're like, "How do you like opening up your business?" I was like, "I'm living the dream, man. I'm living the dream."
Yeah, Danielle, I think you win for best oh shit moment so far. Because that has actual shit. We were joking about
actual
that
sewage.
We're like, oh, what if it was OPC?
Actual sewage.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're out of time. But thank you so much. This has been great getting to know you and your business. And I think there are a lot of folks, as you know, who are in that space of how do I turn this small little thing that I do, this passion I have, and take it to the next level. So I hope they'll check out.
How do we find you?
Yeah.
How do they find you?
So I'm Danielle S. Kaminski. That's me. That's my website. That's my handle. That's the best way to find me. And I link up to everything that I do. If you come to my website or on my Instagram or my Facebook or anything, the podcast for, the group for makers is Makers Chat. The conference is Makers and Shakers Conference. And then, of course, the store is Reinvintage Warehouse in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So
excellent. And Jennifer, where can they find us?
Well, you can find this podcast on your favorite podcast.
All the platforms.
All the platforms, your favorite one, pick one. Or if you want more information, you can go to Orange Whip, and that's WIP for Work in Progress. orangewhip.com, and you can find out information about our media company, the podcast, as well as our local digital digests. So, yeah. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank
We
you,
appreciate it.
Danielle.
Thank you, ladies, for having me. It was great.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll meet in person
Yeah, it's not too far. I'm
soon.
heading out there.
I might go out there too.
Yeah,
Road
I'm
trip.
heading out there. Bye.
Yeah. Come see
Bye,
you.
Danielle.
Bye.